Have you ever noticed that when someone betrays you, something deep inside doesn't just break, it shifts? Not on the surface, where words and arguments live, but in the hidden chambers of your mind, where silence carries more weight than any explanation. This is where the law of inner equilibrium begins its quiet work. It's not a man-made law, nor a moral code written in books. It's a psychological principle as old as the human soul itself. It governs the invisible process by which the psyche restores its own balance after emotional earthquakes. And betrayal, by its very nature, shakes that inner ground like nothing else. When betrayal strikes, the first response is often chaos. Thoughts collide. Emotions surge in conflicting directions. One part of you wants to confront, another wants to retreat, and a third part simply freezes, unable to process the shock. The betrayal disrupts what felt safe, stable, and predictable. It creates a psychic imbalance, like a sudden tilt in a perfectly calibrated scale. But the human psyche is not a passive victim. It contains within it a natural force that seeks to restore equilibrium. This force doesn't operate through conscious decisions at first. It moves beneath awareness, rearranging your emotional landscape in ways you might not immediately understand. The betrayer usually sees only the surface. They witness your visible reaction, the silence, the anger, or the distance, but they don't see the deeper adjustment taking place. They think the chaos is permanent. They believe their action has tilted the scales in their favor indefinitely. What they cannot comprehend is that the psyche is a self-regulating system. The disruption they caused activates internal mechanisms that are far more enduring than any external control they think they have. At first, this law doesn't feel like a gift. It feels like disorientation. You may experience sleepless nights, recurring memories, or a looping of why questions that seem endless. This is not weakness. This is the mind searching for a new point of psychological balance. Betrayal rips away illusions, and what follows is a restructuring, painful but precise. The psyche begins to sort through what was real, what was projected, and what must now be released. Each thought, each emotion is like a weight being measured on that inner scale until harmony can be gradually restored. This law works in two directions, inwardly for the betrayed and silently upon the betrayer as well. For the betrayed, the process is restorative. It involves acknowledging the rupture, integrating the lesson, and re-establishing a sense of inner wholeness. For the betrayer, however, the same law manifests as delayed consequence. By disrupting the equilibrium of another person's inner world, they unknowingly disturb their own. A psychological ripple travels back toward them, often slowly, but with a precision that no external punishment can match. When you begin to stabilize after betrayal, subtle changes occur. Your emotional dependence on the betrayer weakens, your perspective sharpens, and your sense of self grows clearer. This isn't forced empowerment. It's a natural correction. The psyche seeks wholeness the way the body seeks healing after a wound. It doesn't need permission to do so. This is why many betrayals over time lead people to unexpected growth. The pain becomes a catalyst, pushing the individual toward deeper insight, boundaries, and strength. The inner scales don't just return to their original state. They recalibrate to a higher level of awareness. Meanwhile, the betrayer's psyche is not exempt. By their action, they have created an imbalance within themselves. At first, they may feel victorious or justified, but as time passes, fragments of unease begin to surface. They may not connect these feelings to their betrayal consciously, but the unconscious does not forget. The mind keeps records far more accurate than memory. What they projected outward eventually returns inward, demanding reconciliation. This is why betrayals often haunt people years after the act, surfacing through regret, guilt, or inexplicable dissatisfaction. The law of inner equilibrium also explains why revenge is ultimately unnecessary for true restoration. When someone betrays you, your psyche doesn't need you to chase justice externally to heal. It is already initiating its own process internally. It will dismantle illusions, reinforce inner structures, and restore balance in its own time. This silent rebalancing is far more transformative than any immediate retaliation could ever be. Those who understand this often step back, not out of weakness, but out of trust in this psychological law. There's a profound intelligence woven into human nature. Betrayal may appear as a rupture, but beneath that rupture lies a blueprint for restoration. Just as nature corrects imbalances in ecosystems through hidden processes, the psyche corrects emotional disruptions through unseen mechanisms. This is why some of the most powerful transformations occur not through loud reactions, but through quiet inner shifts. It's also why many betrayers eventually face consequences that seem almost poetic in their timing. What they disturbed in another begins to reverberate back through their own lives, often when they least expect it. Understanding this law changes the way betrayal is experienced. Instead of viewing it as an irreversible wound, it can be seen as a catalyst that sets a deeper balancing force into motion. The pain is real, the chaos is undeniable, but neither is permanent. Beneath it all, an ancient mechanism begins its work the moment the betrayal occurs. It's patient, precise, and far more powerful than the betrayer could ever imagine. Have you ever wondered why some people seem untouched after betraying someone, only for life to circle back and confront them in unexpected ways? At first, it can seem unfair. They walk away with ease, while you're left carrying the weight of the wound. But beneath the surface of human behavior operates a profound psychological truth. Every action eventually meets its reflection. This is the mirror of consequences, a subtle, relentless force that ensures that what people project outward inevitably returns to them, magnified through time and circumstance. When betrayal occurs, it doesn't simply disappear into the past. It leaves an imprint, an invisible pattern, within both the betrayer and the betrayed. For the betrayed, this imprint manifests as emotional shock, disillusionment, and a deep questioning of trust. For the betrayer, however, the imprint takes a different form, a psychological echo that begins quietly but grows louder over time. At first, they may feel empowered, as if they've escaped responsibility. But the mirror doesn't respond immediately. It waits, it observes, and then, at the most unexpected moments, it begins to reflect their actions back to them with unsettling precision. This mirror isn't mystical, it's psychological. Every human action carries with it unconscious motives, emotional energies, and moral consequences. When someone betrays, they don't just harm another person. They disrupt the psychological environment around them. They create fractures in trust, distort their own self-image, and plant seeds of future emotional repercussions. These seeds may take months or years to sprout, but they always find their way back. The most striking aspect of the mirror of consequences is that it often manifests through experiences that resemble the original betrayal. But from the opposite side, the betrayer may one day find themselves trusted by someone who later deceives them. They may encounter sudden shifts in loyalty within their own circle, or they may experience inexplicable feelings of paranoia and insecurity, as if they are being watched by the shadow of their own actions. What they projected outward, the disregard, the manipulation, the betrayal, returns to them, not always through the same people, but through life's intricate web of relationships and events. Psychologically, this happens because betrayal alters the betrayer's internal landscape. They carry within them an unresolved dissonance, the gap between who they pretend to be and what they have done. At first, they may suppress it, rationalize it, or cover it with new distractions. But the unconscious mind keeps score. It stores the act like a mirror tucked behind curtains, waiting for the moment when external life will pull those curtains open. And when it does, the betrayer is forced to confront their reflection, not as they wish to see themselves, but as their actions have shaped them. For the betrayed, understanding this mirror can be both painful and liberating. Painful because it doesn't offer instant justice. Liberating because it shows that you don't have to chase accountability with desperation. Life has its own way of balancing accounts. Those who wrong you often believe they've left the scene of the crime untouched, but they carry with them an invisible mirror that travels wherever they go. Time plays a crucial role in this process. Immediately after betrayal, the betrayer might seem unaffected, even thriving. They may justify their behavior, rewrite the story in their favor, or simply avoid reflection altogether. But as time unfolds, life begins to present them with situations that subtly force introspection, a relationship that mirrors their own actions, a trusted friend who suddenly withdraws, a moment of vulnerability where they experience the same kind of emotional dislocation they once caused. These moments may appear coincidental, but psychologically, they are consequences taking shape through mirrored experiences. The mirror doesn't only work through external events, it also operates internally. Betrayers eventually face a growing discomfort that surfaces through anxiety, guilt, or a persistent sense of unrest. Their unconscious begins to challenge the narratives they built to justify their actions. Late at night, in moments of silence, when distractions fade, their mind replays scenes they thought they had buried. This is the mirror turning toward them, reflecting not just their deeds, but their intentions, their excuses, and their unacknowledged motives. The power of the mirror of consequences also lies in its unpredictability. It doesn't follow human timelines or moral schedules. It may take years for the reflection to appear, and when it does, it often arrives through the very areas the betrayer values most. If they betrayed a friend, they may later find their social circles fracturing. If they betrayed a partner, they may encounter trust issues in future relationships that they can't explain. If they betrayed themselves through denial or manipulation, life may confront them with moments that strip away their illusions, forcing them to face the reality they once avoided. This phenomenon isn't revenge, it's psychological symmetry. Betrayal creates imbalance and mirrors restore it. The betrayer's own psyche participates in this restoration, often without their consent. Over time, their self-image erodes under the weight of unresolved actions. They begin to sense a gap between how they want to be perceived and the truth they carry. This gap becomes a mirror too. one that doesn't show them the mask they wear, but the cracks beneath it. For the betrayed, this mirror serves as a reminder that consequences don't need to be orchestrated. They unfold naturally. By stepping back and allowing life's reflective mechanisms to operate, one can conserve emotional energy and focus on growth rather than retaliation. The mirror will do its work in its own way, on its own timeline, and with a precision that no human strategy could replicate. Betrayal may seem like a momentary act, but its echo lives on. The mirror of consequences ensures that no act truly disappears. It is reflected, revisited, and returned through the quiet architecture of human psychology, through time, relationships, and the unavoidable meeting between one's actions and their reflection. There is a moment after betrayal when every instinct urges you to react. You want to explain, defend, confront, or expose. Your emotions demand a stage, your pain seeks acknowledgement, and your mind spins with imagined conversations where you deliver the perfect response. Yet hidden beneath all of these impulses lies a deeper, quieter force, the power of non-reaction. This is not silence born of fear, nor withdrawal driven by weakness. It is a deliberate psychological stance, a form of strength that unsettles betrayers more than any retaliation ever could. Human interactions are governed by emotional feedback loops. One person acts, the other responds, and the cycle continues. Betrayers often rely on this loop. They expect their actions to provoke predictable emotional outbursts: anger, pleading, confusion, because these reactions validate their sense of control. A strong reaction can be manipulated, reframed, or used as justification. But when you break this loop and offer no reaction, the psychological landscape shifts entirely. Suddenly, the betrayer is left with their actions echoing back at them unanswered, forcing them into a confrontation with their own motives. Non-reaction is a mirror they did not prepare for. A reaction gives them something to resist. Silence gives them themselves. When you refuse to engage, their power doesn't grow. It diminishes. The energy they expected to feed on is no longer available. They may try to provoke you further, to get a rise, to regain control of the narrative. But the absence of reaction is like standing in front of a locked door they cannot open. It confuses their expectations and interrupts their psychological strategy. This power operates on multiple levels. On a personal level, non-reaction gives your psyche space to process events without interference. Emotional storms often cloud judgment, leading to decisions made in haste that can deepen the wound rather than heal it. By stepping back, you give your inner world time to recalibrate. Your mind can analyze clearly, your emotions can settle, and your sense of self can remain intact. Reaction often hands power to the betrayer, non-reaction protects it. On a psychological level, silence forces the betrayer's unconscious mind to face the void they created. Humans are accustomed to cause and effect dynamics. They act, they receive feedback, and they adjust accordingly. Betrayal, when met with intense reaction, allows the betrayer to rationalize or justify their choices. But when they are met with silence, they lose the ability to define the situation on their terms. Instead of your reaction shaping their narrative, their own actions become the only narrative left. This absence acts like an unyielding psychological wall. The power of non-reaction also lies in the discomfort it generates. People often expect emotional closure to occur through conflict or explanation. Betrayers, consciously or not, anticipate that their betrayal will result in some form of emotional entanglement. tears, accusations, attempts at reconciliation. Your silence removes this script entirely. They are left with unanswered questions, unplayed roles, and unresolved tension. And human beings by nature are unsettled by unresolved tension. This discomfort grows over time, especially as they begin to realize that your silence is not temporary confusion, but intentional stillness. This doesn't mean non-reaction is easy. Internally, it can feel like holding back a storm. The urge to speak, to justify, to be heard can be overwhelming. But this is where its strength lies. Choosing not to react is an act of emotional discipline. It requires trusting the long arc of psychological consequences rather than seeking immediate emotional release. While reaction satisfies a momentary impulse, non-reaction sets in motion deeper, more enduring dynamics that unfold over time. For the betrayer, non-reaction creates an unexpected void. Instead of facing a heated confrontation they can deflect or manipulate, they are confronted with silence that offers no foothold. Many betrayers interpret silence as indifference at first, but as time passes, the silence begins to act like a mirror. Their actions reverberate within them. Guilt, confusion, and even regret can surface in ways they cannot control. They may start questioning their assumptions, replaying their decisions, and wondering why their expected reaction never came. This psychological uncertainty can be far more haunting than any angry words. In some cases, non-reaction destabilizes the betrayer's carefully constructed narrative. Often, betrayers create internal justifications for their actions, stories that paint them as misunderstood, forced, or even morally justified. A strong reaction can sometimes reinforce these narratives, allowing them to feel validated in their betrayal. Silence, however, gives them nothing to work with. Their narrative remains suspended, incomplete, forcing them to sit with the raw reality of their choices without external validation. Non-reaction also protects your dignity. Reacting in the heat of betrayal often leads to emotional exposure that can later feel disempowering. Words said in pain can be twisted, actions taken in anger can be used against you, and vulnerability can be weaponized. Silence, on the other hand, allows you to maintain control over your energy and your image. It communicates a boundary that doesn't need explanation. It says, I will not participate in the chaos you created without needing to utter a single word. This power is not about pretending nothing happened. It is about creating space between the act of betrayal and your response, a space where clarity and self-respect grow. It's about refusing to let someone else's actions dictate your emotional state. Over time, this stance becomes its own form of quiet strength. While the betrayer is left grappling with the echoes of their actions, you are free to process, heal, and evolve without their interference. The power of non-reaction is both strategic and deeply psychological. It withdraws the emotional currency that betrayal thrives on. It interrupts destructive feedback loops. It unsettles the betrayer's unconscious mind. And most importantly, it preserves your inner world from further harm, allowing the deeper laws of psychological balance and consequence to unfold without obstruction. There are forces within the human psyche that operate far beneath the surface of awareness, shaping actions, desires, and fears without ever announcing their presence. Among these forces, none is more quietly powerful than what psychologists call the return of the repressed. Betrayal is one of the most potent triggers of this phenomenon. It doesn't just break trust between people, it stirs the deep psychological layers within the betrayer, pulling buried emotions, unacknowledged motives, and unresolved conflicts out from the shadows and forcing them back into consciousness in unpredictable ways. What begins as an external act eventually becomes an internal confrontation. When someone betrays another, they often act from impulses they barely understand themselves. Jealousy, insecurity, desire for control, fear of vulnerability, or long suppressed resentments may be operating beneath their conscious reasoning. They might rationalize their actions with neat explanations. I had no choice. They deserved it. It's better this way. But these are often surface justifications covering deeper psychological drives. These drives don't disappear after the betrayal. They remain in the unconscious simmering. And the unconscious has its own laws. Whatever is repressed does not die. It waits, it gathers force, and eventually it returns. Repression is a defense mechanism. It allows individuals to push unwanted thoughts, feelings, or impulses out of awareness because confronting them would create too much internal conflict. Betrayers often repress guilt, shame, or the real motives behind their actions because acknowledging them would threaten their self-image. For a time, this seems to work. They may even appear unaffected, living as if their betrayal had no psychological cost. But repression is not destruction, it is storage. The psyche is like a vast cellar where unresolved emotions and denied truths are locked away, not eliminated. The return of the repressed occurs when those buried elements find a way back to the surface, often through indirect, unexpected, or even self-sabotaging forms. Guilt may resurface as anxiety. Shame may reappear through irritability, defensiveness, or sudden hostility toward others. Old insecurities may manifest in future relationships, creating patterns of behavior that the betrayer can't quite explain. Sometimes the return happens through dreams, intrusive thoughts, or recurring memories they thought were long forgotten. At other times, it happens through external situations that mirror their internal state, forcing them to face what they once avoided. Betrayal acts like a psychological key that unlocks these repressed chambers. In betraying someone, the betrayer often awakens elements within themselves they were trying to keep silent. For example, someone who betrays out of jealousy might initially feel vindicated, but later, the jealousy they tried to suppress may grow stronger, appearing in new contexts. Someone who betrays because of insecurity may temporarily feel powerful, but their deeper feelings of inadequacy eventually resurface, sometimes magnified by the very act that was meant to conceal them. The unconscious ensures that nothing remains buried forever. The return is rarely gentle. Repressed material doesn't emerge as calm reflection. It often returns as emotional turbulence. Betrayers might experience sudden mood swings, unexplained dissatisfaction, or conflicts that seem unrelated on the surface but are deeply connected underneath. They may project their guilt onto others, accusing people around them of the very behaviors they themselves engaged in. This projection is another defense, but it also signals that the repressed is knocking at the door of consciousness, demanding recognition. One of the most striking ways this phenomenon unfolds is through repetition. Individuals who repress their motives often find themselves repeating similar patterns of betrayal or emotional disruption, even when they consciously intend to avoid them. This is because the unresolved material within continues to shape their choices from the shadows. Until they confront what has been repressed, They remain unconsciously drawn toward situations that recreate the original conflict, hoping for resolution, but often generating more pain. The betrayed may not see these inner battles, but they are happening silently. What seems like indifference from the outside can conceal deep psychological unrest on the inside. The betrayer might wear a mask of calm, but internally, their psyche is engaged in a quiet struggle between the self they present and the truths they have buried. Over time, this struggle creates cracks in the mask. They may become defensive without reason, avoid certain topics obsessively, or oscillate between arrogance and insecurity. These are not random behaviors. They are the unconscious trying to push repressed material back into awareness. The return of the repressed can also manifest physically. The mind and body are intimately connected, and unresolved psychological conflicts often express themselves through physical symptoms when they are not consciously addressed. Headaches, tension, insomnia, or sudden fatigue can all be ways the body communicates what the mind is unwilling to face. The betrayer might not connect these symptoms to their past actions, but the psyche does not separate emotional truth from physical experience so neatly. This phenomenon explains why betrayals often haunt people years later, long after the event itself has faded from daily conversation. What was repressed doesn't follow the timeline of the external world. It follows the timeline of the unconscious, which is cyclical, not linear. A betrayer might seem untouched in the short term, but years later, something triggers the return. A familiar situation, a new relationship, or a period of introspection. Suddenly, emotions they thought were long gone rise to the surface, demanding to be acknowledged. For the betrayed, understanding this process provides a different perspective on the betrayer's journey. While betrayal creates visible wounds for the victim, it creates hidden wounds for the perpetrator. These wounds are buried beneath layers of denial and repression, but they remain active, influencing behavior and emotions long after the act. The return of the repressed ensures that no betrayal remains psychologically neutral. It initiates an inner reckoning that unfolds slowly, often invisibly, but inevitably drawing the betrayer back into confrontation with the very parts of themselves they try to escape. There is a particular kind of transformation that doesn't happen through dramatic declarations or grand revenge. It happens quietly, almost imperceptibly, beneath the surface of chaos and pain. This is the silent rise, the inner evolution that unfolds after betrayal, not through retaliation, but through growth that needs no witness to validate it. While the betrayer often expects emotional collapse, visible bitterness, or attempts at desperate reconciliation, what truly unsettles them is when none of that happens. Instead, the person they underestimated begins to change in silence, step by step, becoming stronger, wiser, and more centered without ever announcing it. Betrayal creates an unexpected kind of stillness. In the beginning, that stillness may feel heavy, like a void left behind by the fracture of trust. It is in this space that many fall into despair, replaying moments, questioning their worth, and trying to make sense of the rupture. But for some, this stillness becomes fertile ground. It becomes a crucible where pain is not merely endured, but transformed. This is not a quick process. The silent rise is rarely sudden. It happens in stages, often beginning with complete emotional disorientation before gradually shifting toward clarity. At first, the betrayed often move through confusion and grief. Their world has been destabilized, their assumptions challenged, their trust shaken. But unlike the betrayer, whose initial sense of control is often external, the betrayed person's journey turns inward. In that quiet inward turning, reflection begins. Questions that were previously avoided surface with intensity. What patterns led here? What truths were ignored? What strengths remained unseen? These questions are not asked in the heat of confrontation, but in the solitude of late nights, silent mornings, and private moments of reckoning. The silent rise begins when pain stops being merely something to escape and becomes something to learn from. There is a shift from, why did this happen to me, to, what can I understand about myself through this? This shift doesn't excuse the betrayal, but it reclaims agency. Instead of remaining frozen in the role of the victim, the betrayed begins to rewrite their internal narrative. They start seeing the difference between the betrayal itself and the meaning they attach to it. This is where quiet strength begins to take root. As time passes, this internal growth starts manifesting externally, though subtly. The betrayed may set firmer boundaries, not as a reaction to fear, but from newfound self-respect. They might pursue goals that were previously postponed, rediscover passions, or invest energy into personal development. Relationships may be approached with more discernment, choices made with more clarity, and self-worth no longer outsourced to external validation. The silent rise doesn't shout, it simply moves forward, and in doing so, it changes everything. Meanwhile, the betrayer often expects to witness visible suffering or to maintain a position of psychological advantage. They anticipate emotional dependency, dramatic confrontations, or evidence that their actions left a lasting wound. But silence disrupts that expectation. When the betrayed begins to rise without needing to announce it, the betrayer is left without a script. They may check from afar, subtly observe, or even test boundaries again, trying to gauge the emotional impact they once had. But what they encounter is different. A person no longer defined by the betrayal, no longer orbiting their actions. The psychological impact of this silent rise on the betrayer is often underestimated. For someone who acted from insecurity, ego, or manipulation, seeing their target evolve despite the wound can be deeply unsettling. It confronts them with their own smallness, their misjudgment, and sometimes their hidden envy. The rise is silent, but its effect is loud inside the betrayer's mind. It's a mirror that reflects not the betrayed's weakness, but the betrayer's failure to truly break them. The silent rise also involves an important process of emotional detachment. This doesn't mean coldness or denial. It means no longer allowing the betrayal to dominate one's emotional landscape. The betrayed begins to reclaim mental and emotional space once consumed by pain. Gradually, the betrayal becomes a chapter, not the entire story. This detachment is powerful because it's not forced. It emerges naturally from healing. When the betrayer realizes that their actions no longer hold the emotional weight they once did, an unexpected shift in power occurs. This transformation is often accompanied by new opportunities. Whether it's personal growth, career advancement, deeper relationships, or a renewed sense of self, the betrayed person's energy begins to flow into creation rather than reaction. This is one of the most profound aspects of the silent rise. The betrayal that was meant to diminish ends up becoming the catalyst for expansion, while the betrayer may remain stuck in their own unresolved dynamics. The betrayed moves forward, often surpassing the emotional and psychological level they once shared. The silent rise doesn't depend on the betrayer's acknowledgement. It thrives in spaces where no applause is given, no audience watches, and no validation is sought. This is what makes it so powerful. Public victories can be dismissed or rationalized by a betrayer, but quiet, undeniable growth is harder to ignore. Over time, they may encounter the evolved version of the person they betrayed and realize, often with discomfort, that their actions contributed to a transformation they neither intended nor controlled. In many cases, this rise happens while the betrayer remains unaware, but eventually reality has a way of revealing it. Through mutual connections, brief encounters, or subtle observations, they begin to see the changes, and it's in those moments that the silent rise becomes its own form of psychological reckoning. What was once dismissed as weakness reveals itself as resilience. What was once underestimated returns as undeniable strength. The betrayer is forced to confront the quiet truth that the person they hurt did not collapse. They transformed silently, steadily, and irreversibly